Now, Gordon Ramsay has launched a High Court proceedings after at least 6 professional squatters took over his North London pub.
These aren't just any old squatter, they're professional squatters. It's understood that he called the police on Wednesday to have them removed, but the Met police officers refused to do so, stating that it was, in fact, a civil matter.
And he's not the only celebrity chef to be targeted by squatters. It appears that a group of 400 squatters have also been removed from Marco Pierre White's abandoned London steak and pizza restaurant.
Well, there you go. So today, for our debate, we want to ask, should squatting, in all circumstances, be a criminal offence?
Well, let's get right into it. Joining us is ex-Treasury Special Advisor, Director of Government Relations at the Adam Smith Institute now, James Price. He thinks squatters deserve to go to prison. And contributing editor at Novara Media, Michael Walker, he believes squatting rights provides places for people to live in the midst of a housing crisis. OK, well, James, you want the change here, so let's start with you. Why should squatters go to prison in all circumstances?
Well, I'm really interested to hear arguments against this. I can kind of understand in a sort of frontier society like the United States, where you're out in the outbacks of the Badlands of North Dakota and you're looking for somewhere and you can see an abandoned cabin up ahead and you go and stay there, that sort of thing. That's not what's happening anymore. As you say, these people are kind of professional squatters who are trying to get either to cause a nuisance or to not have to pay rent or things like that, or eventually to try and take private property off of people. We've already seen in Florida recently that Governor Ron DeSantis has seen this has been a problem, and boom, he's just gone and changed the legislation. I think that's excellent. And I'm speaking to you today from the Adam Smith Institute. I've got an Adam Smith quote here: "The protection of every individual's property against those who would attempt either by violence or fraud to take it from him is one of the chief tasks of government." I think it's one of the fewest things that government should definitely be doing to protect people's private property from squatters breaking in like this.
Well, there you go. Michael, do you believe in property rights?
In most circumstances, yeah, but I think if you're not using a piece of land, then it goes back very long, a long time into British tradition. We don't have to sort of hypothesize about what might have been the case in the American frontier. Squatters' rights were sort of central to the peasants' revolt, in the 1300s, the diggers in the 1600s, especially actually the peak of squatting in the UK was after the Second World War, when you had lots of veterans. You had a big homelessness problem and you had lots of empty buildings. Now, it needs to be understood. I think your audience need to be clear. It's not legal to occupy a building which is in use, right? If you try and occupy a building which is in use, then the police will kick you out. Now, up until 2012, any building that wasn't in use, that was empty on a long-term basis, then people, yes, could go into that building and begin to use it. And it would then be a civil case. So it wouldn't be a criminal case. The owners of the building would have to take you to court. Now, since 2012, I think, unfortunately, the law was changed. And as I say, a law that goes back hundreds of years, the law was changed. So it became a criminal offence to squat.
But Michael, what if you haven't decided yet what to do with it? You know, you own a property, you haven't quite decided whether you want to make it into a bar, or you want to sell it, or you want to change it into a new restaurant. You can't just expect people to just rock up and nick it.
Well, I mean, historically, the idea of squatting is that you occupy something that's been empty for a long-term basis. So in this situation with Gordon Ramsay, as I understand it, it hadn't been empty for very long at all. And I assume that's why it's been incredibly easy for him to regain possession of it. But you do have buildings which are empty for a very long period of time. And I think in the context where you have a housing crisis, people do have a responsibility to use their buildings properly, because it's not so much about the bricks and mortar. I'm not really fussed about the bricks and mortar. What I'm fussed about is the land, because land is this incredibly valuable commodity. And you are really staking a claim on a part of a city if you're sitting on an empty property.
Well, so there you go. Let's throw that over to James. If you're not using your property, then anyone has any right to take it from you.
Well, I've certainly got some sympathy with the idea of there being a housing crisis we've got right now, and people should be making a lot more use of these things. And I think we'd probably all agree that we all get very frustrated when you see some hideous building that isn't being torn down to be turned into much more beautiful accommodation, or a kind of horrible old petrol station that is being classified as green belt that isn't being used. We all get frustrated, I think, all four of us talking here about that, and we should definitely do a lot more about it. But when you've got these kinds of shortages, which, by the way, are caused by government intervention, legislation, government rules that are stopping things being built or whatever else it may be, the answer is not to allow people to kind of break in. You've not got people, it's not veterans after the Second World War, which sounds like a fairly legitimate reason. These are professional people who've got no respect for property rights breaking in. They'll be leaving rubbish. There'll be fire hazards. There could be criminal property problems, all these other issues that get brought about by the kinds of people who are doing it today. So yeah, definitely let's build more houses. Let's build a more beautiful, wonderful Britain, but let's not do that at the expense of private property rights.
Michael, I wonder if, in your vision of what society should look like and how we should be ruled, if someone has, if they're living alone, but they're living in a 6-bedroom house, do you think that they should be turfed out to make way for better usage of that property? How far would you go?
So in terms of under-occupation, which is a real issue, I don't think anyone should be turfed out of their homes, but I would say we should have a taxation system which encourages people to downsize. There are lots of large families in very small flats and lots of people who, their kids have maybe moved out who are in very large houses. Now, I don't think the state should come along and force people to move out, but I do think it would be a good idea if, we had a proportionate level of council tax. So if you're in a massive house, you pay quite a lot of tax, and you're incentivized to downsize. I think it would also be very helpful if we made it easy for people to downsize by making sure that there are lots of flats nearby. Obviously, I really don't want old people to have to move out of their communities. I want people to live and stay in their neighborhoods, but that requires us to have shed loads of flats everywhere. Now, I should say, I don't think squatting is the solution to the housing crisis. I think the solution to the housing crisis is building shed loads more houses, especially council homes. But I think, if anything, squatting marginally helps the housing crisis. I don't think it does anything to make the housing crisis worse.
Well, let's throw that back to James, because after all, James, you're sitting there at the Adam Smith Institute. Adam Smith was perhaps the father of modern capitalism. Your philosophy goes back, 300-odd years? But Michael Walker here is talking about the Peasants' Revolt. Yeah. He's talking about Wat Tyler in the 1300s. Surely that's an older tradition. Shouldn't people be getting behind that sort of archbishop murdering sort of thing?
We can go all the way back to the Romans who thought that private property, at least for other Romans, was absolutely sacrosanct. And a hero of mine, someone like Cicero, even he managed to have a couple of different properties and wouldn't have taken too kindly to someone going and squatting in his house. Although I think actually when Clodius exiled him, they tore Cicero's house down, which is a bit of a mean thing to do, perhaps. I want to agree partly with Michael here that, again, building more houses is definitely the answer to this. But I was starting to hear Michael almost defending the old idea of the bedroom tax from the coalition days here. When you had people who had council houses who didn't have as many occupants as there were rooms, they were asked to kind of move out of these sorts of places. And then the Labour Party was saying this is a very terrible thing to move people out, all the rest of it. So I think we can all agree that sort of supply and demand is one of the most powerful things here. Adam Smith definitely would have agreed with that. But again, I just don't think the right thing to do is to allow these kinds of people to break into property. It's not going to help other residents be more in favour of having building going on when you've got a bunch of squatters. No. Let's face it, they're not going to be debating the merits of Adam Smith and Cicero.
We've run out of time, I'm afraid. I mean, I know that we could all talk about this.
Just
a quick sentence to you, Michael.
I just want an opportunity to read out one more quote from Adam Smith to the Adam Smith Institute. As soon as the land of any country has all become private property, the landlords, like all other men, love to reap where they have never sowed and demand a rent even for its natural produce. So that's my favourite Adam Smith quote.
Well, there we go. We've ended up in the most nerdy debate I think we could have possibly had. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Interesting stuff there.